I would like to welcome everyone back to the Covenant of Sinai with Rabbi David Silber. Join Rabbi Silber as he continues this ongoing series covering the first two books of Tanakh. The reception of the Torah at Sinai and the episode of the Golden Calf and its aftermath are formative events for the Jewish people. It's a pleasure to be learning with Rabbi Silber, the founder and dean of Drisha, as we have for the past few weeks. Sources for today's class will be shared on screen from Sefaria. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Rabbi Silber.
Okay, very good. So this is the last of these set of sessions. We're in the middle of the story of the golden calf. I don't think we're going to finish it. We'll have to probably finish it when we resume. Then I want to turn our attention. We didn't deal with some of the many laws that are given after the Debrot. That is Pashat Mishpatim. That's extremely interesting. I'd like to spend a fair amount of time on that. And we also haven't discussed the Mishkan, which I hope we will do as well. But we're still in the middle of the story of the Egel, which is a central story, one of the most, if not the most significant story in these books. And so where we left off was Moshe comes down the mountain and he sees the golden calf. In particular, I emphasize, he sees the people dancing around the golden calf. He knew about the golden calf. He knew about the worship. He didn't know about the dancing and the incredible enthusiasm. And when he sees this, here it says, out of his anger, Vayicharaf Moshe, and he breaks the tablets. I didn't want to go back to a point, I think I mentioned this last week, and that is that it is presented in terms of his anger. Now, in the version in the book of Devarim, which I don't know if we'll get to today, there it sounds different. There it doesn't mention anger. There it says, I broke the tablets before you. And that's a different sense, that he's kind of educational. It's not that he's angry. It comes to a reasoned conclusion that these tablets are not to be given to the people. In fact, they've lost their value. I would say more than lost their value. That's the point that I think I emphasized last week, that actually giving the tablets to them would be a bad mistake. I put it in terms of the people are dancing around a golden calf, which is idolatry. Idolatry is taking something that is meant to be a means towards an end and seeing it as an end in itself. That's the core idea of idolatry. And maybe the golden calf didn't start off that way, but it certainly became that over the course of time. And Moshe recognizes that if giving them the tablets would be tantamount to allowing them to serve idols. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but the idea of Mizeh Heim Ktuvim, they're written on both sides. It means you can't hide them. Wherever they are, they're visible. And Moshe realizes that therefore they can't be here. He takes the tablets and he breaks the tablets. When I taught the book of Shmuel, which I've taught a couple of different times, I made the observation that in the book of Shmuel, if you remember in the story in Shmuel, when the beginning of the book, the people are fighting against the Plishtim, and they lose the first battle. And the people said, why did we lose the battle against the Philistines? Maybe because we didn't have the ark with us. If we go to Shiloh and take the ark into battle, we will certainly win. So the ark is brought out to the battle, carried by no less than Chafni and Pinchas, the two corrupt priests of Shiloh, about whom the book of Shmuel says God hates them and wants to kill them. Chafetz Hashem lahamitam, and they carry the ark into battle. Now, when we study the book of Shmuel, I raised the question as to what are the people thinking when they bring the ark into battle? I raised two possibilities. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Two possibilities were, the ark is a magical object. If you have the ark, you have God. They don't make that distinction. It's kind of idolatrous thinking, because the ark is not God. But that's the thing. You automatically have God. You win. That's one possibility. The second possibility I suggested when we studied the book of Shmuel is that the people are thinking something else. The ark is a representation of God, but once God is involved, you bring God into the battle, then we're going to win, because how would it look for God to lose? God's not going to let us lose the battle, because if we lose the battle, that will besmirch God's reputation. That's what they think. Little do they know that God doesn't care about that God is perfectly willing to allow the ark to be captured by the Philistines. Of course, after the Philistines capture the ark, and they presume that their God has defeated our God, God then acts against the God of the Philistines and against the Philistines, and there are plagues and there's destruction, and the idols of the Philistines are destroyed. So it's not that God is in favor of the Philistines. When God has to make a choice, whose side are you on, the Philistines or the Jews, there's always a third option, which is neither. I'm on nobody's side. I'm on my side. So if the Jews mistreat me, I'm against them. And if the Philistines mistreat me, I'm against them. And actually, the thinking of the Philistines and the Jews in that story is not very different. It's the same kind of thinking. Anyway, the ark is returned finally to the Jews, and then there's a plague, and the ark is set aside. If you remember, it's sent to a place called Kiryat Yarim, the forest. And the text says that the ark is away for many, many years. For 20 years, there's no ark. And the text says in the book of Shmuel, the ark was away for 20 years. Vayhinahu b'nei Yisrael acharei Hashem, and the people yearned for God. When we studied the book of Shmuel, I made the point that actually the way the writer of the book of Shmuel presents it, it's that it's dafka because the ark is not there. That the search for God is possible in the absence of the ark. If you have the ark, you don't search for God. You think you have God. You have the ark. So therefore you have God. That's the mistake, or the idolatrous thinking. Because the ark is not God. The ark is a means to connect. It's just a means. And my point is that Shmuel, whose character draws upon in so many ways the character of Moshe, it's exactly the lesson that Moshe teaches us, the story breaking the Luchot. He makes a simple point. The Torah itself can be avodah zarah. Whenever you think something is an end in itself, it's idolatry. The Luchot, forget the Torah, the Luchot written by God, they can be avodah zarah. It can be idolatry. The ark can be idolatry. The Torah can be idolatry. Everything that is seen as an end in and of itself, and not seen as bringing you closer to the sacred, but it has intrinsic significance. It's an end in and of itself. That's idolatrous. So Moshe has to break the Luchot. There's no question about that. He breaks the Luchot, and as I said, the difference between the presentation here in Exodus and the one in Devarim, here it mentions anger. In Sefer Devarim, it doesn't mention that he's angry. It says, I broke them before you. But even over here, my argument is, even over here, yes, he's angry. That is all true. But I don't think it necessarily illuminates the possibility that there is a deep educational message in the story over here. Maybe either through Moshe himself or through the text. But either way, this is an incredibly important message. In any event, that was point number one. I wanted to emphasize that point. And I want to mention the book of Shmuel. Now, in addition to that, I made another point, which is obvious. When you see it, it's obvious, let's put it that way. And that is when Moshe breaks the Luchot, this is a very important point, the Mishkan cannot be built. Because everything else in the Mishkan, human beings can construct. But what the Chumash emphasizes about the Luchot is they're written by God. The tablets are God's tablets. The writing is God's writing. And therefore, since in fact, as the Ramban has pointed out, the key vessel of the Mishkan is the ark and the cover and the kruvim, the kaporet, the kruvim, from which God speaks, which the Ramban argues is the main point of the Mishkan altogether. God continues to speak after Sinai. That's the Ramban's take. And whether you buy the Ramban or not, it's certainly true. In other words, it may not be the main point. The Ramban says that's the main point of the Mishkan. But obviously, it's the first vessel the Torah mentioned when the Torah describes the Mishkan. Someday we'll come back to the Mishkan. So everything else human beings can make, but the Luchot they can't. So what happens over here when Moshe breaks the tablets means there cannot be a Mishkan. Cannot be a Mishkan. The goal of the book is the Mishkan. That's the end of the book. The goal is building a house, and God and the people dwelling together. But God and the people can't dwell together unless God agrees to give us a second set of tablets. And God seems to be in no mood to do such a thing. Quite the opposite. God wanted to destroy the people. Okay, Moshe reasons with God. You can't do it. You made promises. It's not in your own best interest. I mean, it's presented in very human terms. But certainly God is in no mood to give another set of tablets. Therefore, the entire project, what I say, the goal, namely Mishkan, cannot happen. Those are the points I wanted to emphasize as we begin our journey this morning, and we'll pick and choose the story. So in chapter 32, Moshe then confronts Aaron, that we spoke about, the confrontation with Aaron. That's in chapter 32, and that runs all the way up and including verse number 25. Okay. The other point I mentioned last week, which I emphasize very much, is that Moshe is alone. There's nobody else. His beloved pupil Yoshua, his faithful pupil, waits there on the bottom of the mountain, but they see the world differently. Joshua is a military man, and Moshe is a shepherd. They see the world differently. His own brother makes the golden calf, and he gives his reasons for it. Okay, but that's not Moshe's thinking. The luchot, the mizeh, the Torah had used those words earlier in the Amalek story to describe the people who support Moshe, who keep his hands up. Aaron and Hur tamchu b'yadav mizeh echad and mizeh echad. That connection that Moshe has to these luchot. Moses is forced to break the tablets. He has to break them. He can't give the people the luchot. He must, as I explained, he has to break them. So he's left with himself. And I pointed out, being left by yourself, that's the first time we actually meet Moshe in the Chumash, in this book. He went out to his brothers. He saw the Egyptian beating the Jew. He looked this way, he looked that way. He saw there was nobody else. There was no man there. Which means, I think, not just he can get away with it, because no one's going to see. What he realized is, as it says in Pirkei Avot, there's no one else who's going to do it. He's the only person. It's him or nobody. And Moshe takes action. So Moshe operates alone. In general, he's alone. I don't speak their language, he says. He's alone. He doesn't set his standards by the people either. He has his own standards. Aaron sets the standard by the people. You know the way they are. Moshe doesn't care the way they are. He has one standard, his standard. And the people who don't understand it, okay, maybe they'll understand it in 100 years, but it doesn't matter. That's Moshe. And now he's alone. So what do you do? So now we have in verse number 26. Pick up with Pasuk Kav Vav in chapter 32. Moshe says, "Vayamod Moshe b'shara machaneh vayomer mi Hashem elai." And Moshe said, "Whoever is for God, come to me." Vayasfu elav kol b'nei Levi, and the Levites, the Leviim, joined with Moshe. Here, there's a play in the Chumash on the word Levi. Of course, Moshe is a Levi himself, as the Torah emphasized in chapter 2 of this book. Vayelach ish beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi. He's the product of a Levi man and a Levi woman. That's what it says in chapter 2. But the word Levi has another meaning. It means to accompany. As Leah said when she named her child Levi, my husband will join up with me after child number 3. This woman Leah, who says about herself, my husband hates me. Snua anochi. Right? God has seen my suffering. God, but maybe now my husband will be the mother of 3 of his kids. So maybe he'll join up with me. And here's the point of the Chumash, that's a very important point, and I want to just give it in, just add something to this. You stand by yourself, you believe in something. And you never really know, actually, does anybody accept what you're saying? You have no way to know. On the surface, you're all alone. And Moshe is alone. That's the emphasis. But he has principles. And he says, listen, Mi Hashem Elai, and lo and behold, some people join him. Whether they are his tribe, who joins, B'nai Levi, or whether the Chumash wants to say that it's not just Levi, it's those who join up with him. The Lavot, right? We have on Saturday night a Malava Malka to accompany the queen, to join up with the queen. The queen is leaving. Shabbos is leaving. There's a Malava Malka. So V'yosful Kol B'nai Levi. I want to emphasize something over here, and again, just to touch upon something, and that is, of course, we all know that these stories, story of Moshe, for example, and the character of Moshe, there is a complex within the Bible of characters that are based upon other characters. So, for example, there's a character of Moshe, the primary character of the Chumash, together with the Avot and the Imahot of Breshit. But there are other characters of the Bible. For example, the character of Shmuel. Anybody who's studied the book of Shmuel knows that the description of Shmuel in the book of Shmuel has many, many commonalities with Moshe. I've taught Shmuel 3 times, and each time you see more and more commonalities. I just wanted to emphasize, it doesn't mean they're the same. There is no other Moshe. Let's start with that. Shmuel is not Moshe. Fine. Anyway, come back. So the character of Shmuel is based on Moshe. That is to say, there are many, many commonalities. They're not the same, but one character is they have many commonalities. The prophets, etc., the way their family is constructed, etc. Another character is Eliyahu. The character of Eliyahu in the book of Malachim is based upon Moshe. Clearly, he goes 40 days and 40 nights. He goes to Har Sinai, etc. And when you're studying these stories, and the character of Yonah is another character. Those 4 characters have much in common with each other. That is to say, similar in many respects, different. And the differences are what's important. You only get to the differences because they're so similar. Now, in the story of Eliyahu is brought up to Mount Sinai. Remember that Eliyahu despairs. He runs away. After the event in the Mount Carmel, where the test that he sets up, and people all cry out, Hashem o Elohim, Hashem is the true God. That's chapter 18. But chapter 19, Queen Jezebel says, I'm going to kill Eliyahu, and he runs off into the desert where he says he wants to die. He says he wants to die because he hasn't really succeeded. And I'm the only person left. There's nobody but me, and they want to kill me. And therefore, there's no point to go on. And God brings him to Mount Sinai. And when we studied the story of Eliyahu, we emphasized that bringing him to Mount Sinai is the book of Malachim's way to recall the events of Har Sinai. And the contrast between how Moshe acts at Sinai, and how Eliyahu wants. Eliyahu despairs, and he says there's nobody else, among other things. And the point over here, and God says to Eliyahu, go back. First of all, there are other people. There's 7,000 people who are steadfast believers in me. And not only that, there's somebody who can be your successor, your protege, Elisha. Navi Taftech. I mentioned that here because that's a very significant story. That Moshe, although he's completely alone, and he has no idea, he sees everybody dancing around the camp. He has no, his own brother made it. But he stands up and he says, Mila Hashem Elai. Maybe there's nobody. But maybe there is somebody, and you will never know that until you actually make that proclamation. Maybe you are alone, maybe you're not alone. And in this case, there are people that join up with him, that are mulaveh. So that's a very important sort of methodological point, how to study the Bible. I mean, it's these stories, the characters, which are basically connected, deeply connected to each other. These 4, certainly. Moshe, Shmuel, Eliyahu, and Yonah. You can't read one without reading the others. And when you read one in the light of the others, it really illuminates your story. It makes it much more complicated. It makes much more nuanced and much deeper. That's how these texts work. In any event, the Leviim come to Moshe. And now Moshe says to them, says Moshe, he speaks in God's name. God never said this, by the way, as far as we know. He intuits what God might be saying. I don't think the text ever suggests that God tells him to do this. He's acting in this what he believes God would want. God did threaten to kill everybody. And Moshe says, gird yourself up with your swords. Ivruva shuva mishar lashar b'machane v'hirgu. Ishet achiv, yishet re'ehu, yishet krovo. He instructs them to kill your family members, kill your friends, right? Kill your neighbors, right? Go from gate to gate, he said, mishar l'shar. And Vayas b'nei Levi, Vayasu b'nei Levi kedvar Moshe, and the Leviim did what Moshe said. Vayipol min ha'am v'yomahu, kishroshet alfei ish, and 3,000 men are killed. There is a civil war. In other words, first of all, let's just reflect on this for a moment, then I'll stop and take comments and questions. Number one, 3,000 people is a lot of people, but there were 600,000 men who left Egypt. And the point is 3,000 out of 600,000 is not a big percentage. So it means that there are people that go along with the golden calf. There are the perpetrators of the golden calf. There are 3,000 perpetrators. And those are the ones who are held accountable. That's point number one. Point number two is that, remember earlier when Moshe comes down the mountain and Yoshua says, Kol milchama b'machaneh, I hear the sound of war in the camp. And then either he corrects himself or Moshe corrects him. There can't be war. I don't hear the sound of the victim. It's not the sound of war. It's a different kind of cry. But actually, in a certain sense, there is a war. And here there actually is a war. It's a different kind of war. Maybe a spiritual battle, which at the end of the day results in an actual war. And these who join at Moshe are slaying the 3,000 who are the instigators of the golden calf. That's point number two. And now we come to point number three, which is a very important point as we move forward in the study of the Chumash. And that is, the Levium have killed 3,000 people, including their own brothers. Echav doesn't mean they're brothers, it means they're relatives. Relatives and friends were massacred by the Levium, were murdered by the Levium. In the name of God, and the text certainly does not suggest they did the wrong thing. But now the question is, what happens to the Levium? I just want to make this point, then I'll stop and take any comments or questions. And that is, the camp is set up in a certain way. When you get to the book of Bamidbar, the Torah describes in some detail the way the camp is set up. In the center of the camp, you have the Mishkan. And then you have the 12 tribes who dwell around the camp. And the Torah says they dwell in 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And in each of these directions, there are 3 tribes that dwell, 3. And one of the tribes of the 3 is sort of the group leader. So, there are 4 group leaders. Let's see, there's Ruvain is one, Yehuda is another one, Ephraim is another one, I believe, and maybe Dan is the 4th one. Yeah, I think it's Dan. Those are the 4 group leaders, and there are 12 that dwell around the Mishkan. But actually, we know that there are 13 tribes and not 12, because Joseph is 2 tribes. Not always, but when in dwelling around the Mishkan, there's a tribe of Ephraim, there's a tribe of Menashe. There are always 12, but how do you get to the 12? Who's missing? Levi. So where does Levi live? So Levi does not live in the same place as the other groups, other tribes. Levi lives around, the different Levium lives surrounding the Mishkan. The 4 sides of the Mishkan, there are different Levium. Moshe is one, Aaron is one, the Levium, etc. There are 4 different groups there. And so the Levium actually don't live with the other tribes. Because the way it's set up, actually, one might say there are 3 camps. That's how the Talmud understands it. There's the inner camp where the Mishkan is, called Machaneh Shechina. Then right around the Mishkan, there's another camp of the Levium, Machaneh Leviah. And then further out, the 12 tribes in the 4 directions, Machaneh Yisrael. Later on, the rabbinic tradition, the Talmud, keeps those distinctions. There's Machaneh Shechina, there's Machaneh Leviah, there's Machaneh Yisrael. It takes a different form when you come into the land, and there are different rules that apply to each. because there are certain kinds of impurities or impure people that are not allowed in Machane Shechina, but are perfectly capable of living in Machane Levia, and some can't even stay in Machane Yisrael, like the leper, etc. So there are all kinds of rules and regulations. What's the point I want to make over here? Point is that the Levium don't dwell. The Levium don't dwell with the other tribes. Now, we have such a concept later in the Torah. In fact, it appears in more than one place, and it's a very important concept. It's called the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. The murderer, the unintentional murderer, the unpremeditated murderer, has to run away, cannot stay and live amongst the people, and runs to cities of refuge. There are 6 cities of refuge, but on top of the 6 cities of refuge, there are 42 more cities of Orei HaLeviim. The Talmud understood that the Orei HaLeviim also function as cities of refuge. The point is, the murderer can't live with the other tribes. Now, in the case of the Levium, they are murderers. I don't mean murder in the sense of criminals, they're killers. They kill their brethren, they kill their neighbors, they kill their friends. So they actually are exiled. The difference between the exile of the Levium and the exile of the unintentional murderer is that, is that the Levium are exiled closer to God. They dwell immediately around the Mishkan. Think of the Ir Miklat as being sent away someplace. They're not sent away, farther away someplace. In the sense that they're presented as they're closer to God. That's number 2. Not just are they closer to God, but they are also serve as a function, as one might say, a buffer between the people and God. Because if you walk into the Mishkan, the Torah emphasized very much, and you're in an inappropriate state, that's a serious offense. And the Levium have the job of what one might say guarding the temple. Guarding is as preserving the sanctity of the temple, but also protecting the people. Because if they walk in, it prevents people from walking in inadvertently. It's also possible, and this is a different question, whether if the Israelites do walk in unintentionally, do the Levium share some of the guilt? That's also a possibility, but leave that out for now. But we should always remember this at all points, that the Levi, in a certain sense, is separate. The Levi doesn't have land. When they come in, when we take the land, capture the land, the Levium don't have land. So the Levium are sort of the outsiders. Often the Torah will include the Levi together with the widow and the orphan. You have to care for the widow, the orphan, and the Levi, who has no land. Having no land means, in a certain sense, they're separate from you. And I think we have to think about that in terms of this particular incident, but the Levium killed the others. Levium killed the others. Okay, let me stop here and take any comments or questions, and then we will continue. If anybody has any thoughts about anything that we've said so far. Said a lot of things so far. Anybody have any comments or questions?
So, Rabbi Silber, it's Sandra. So, is this really a redoing of what Moshe did when he killed the Ish Ivri? So he was a killer of his brother, basically.
He killed the Mitzri. Moshe kills the Mitzri, yeah.
He kills the Mitzri, but he also maket, and he's essentially he runs away from his brothers who tattletale on him, and so it's a sort of he becomes an outsider based on a killing act. So I mean,
that's true. I mean, I think he probably was an outsider even before that, but you're right. He becomes an outsider by taking a position that you can't hit the other. He criticizes his Rasha Lamataka Reyecha. He says, "Why are you a wicked person? Why do you hit your friend?"
Right.
And that angers them. Who made you the judge? And he is the ultimate outsider. And I would say yes.
Yeah. Then he realized
the Levium are killers. In other words, let's start with Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi massacre Shem. Moshe kills. In chapter 2, Moshe kills the Egyptian. Moshe here orders the Levium to kill their fellow Jews. The turning point in the Chumash actually is another act of killing of a Levi, which is Pinchas. Pinchas, of course, is a Levi. He's a Levi. He's a Kohen. He's a Levi, obviously. And he kills Shimon. Levi kills Shimon. Well, Levi kills Shimon in the story of Pinchas. That's the turning point, because from that point on, the priests are not killers. Hinanino Tenu et Briti Shalom. So there is this movement from Levi being a killer, or in the Shimon and Levi in Shechem, it goes back to Shechem. And then Moshe is the killer, and Moshe here, and Pinchas, and then stops. And then there's a radical transformation. Yes, but Moshe being the outsider, of course, is the ultimate outsider. I mean, Eliyahu is an outsider too. Moshe is the ultimate outsider, and that's what we have over here in the story. He has nobody, but people do gravitate towards him. And those who gravitate towards him are also outsiders, as it turns out. But the outsider is necessary. The Levium play a central role in the from here on in. They will play a central role. They become the teachers. They become just the protectors of Israel, the guardians of the temple, etc. But they are in exile. They're living separately. Anybody else for comment or question?
Rabbi Silber,
Yep.
the phrase "Kayomar Hashem," does it have any significance? It's a phrase that's repeated again and again later.
That's right. Kol Mar Hashem, typically, I mean, Kol Mar Hashem sounds like Moshe is saying word for word what God has told him. Thus speaks the Lord. But what's interesting over here is the text does not tell us that God spoke to Moshe. That's for sure. Moshe, it sounds like, is speaking. Moshe speaks in God's name. There's no question about that. That's what he's saying. This is what God would want us to do. But Moshe's interpreting, I think, what God might want. There certainly is no direct evidence that God said this to Moshe. Now, we know God is not squeamish about killing people because God said earlier, if you leave me alone, I will kill them all. God's willing to kill them. Moshe argues, God doesn't really want to kill them all, because God opens the opportunity for Moshe to speak. And they don't kill them all. They kill the main perpetrators. They kill, only 3 out of 600, 1 out of 200, it's half of 1%. But those are the ones. But I think Moshe is speaking, and he does this often, very often in the Chumash. When Moshe says to do something in God's name, the text does not tell us that God instructed Moshe to do so, and that says a lot about Moshe. He sort of stands in for God. He sort of has the right, the privilege to speak in God's name. And for the most part, we have to assume that he speaks accurately in God's name. Here we have, I think it's clear from the story that it's something that God might actually want. In any event, Moshe now his allies, and let's continue with this. He says, "Vayasu b'nei Levi kidvar Moshe, vayipol b'na'am bayomahu kishloshen alfei ish." 3,000 died, I said. Vayobin Moshe, milu yedchem hayom Hashem is verse number 29. Kish bivno uvachiv ulatet alechem hayom bracha. Here we have an expression that appears many times in the Torah, and it's a very curious expression, and that is to fill up your hands. L'malei et yadam. The translation that I have here is either dedicate yourselves, to fill it with dedicate yourselves. Another possibility is be an object of I can't even read this over here. Division? I don't know. I can't see what it says here, but my point is that L'malei Yadam appears frequently in the Torah in terms of responsibilities to serve. The priests are dedicated. There's a priestly ritual. There's a ritual later to allow the priest to assume their role, to fill their head, to give them the privilege of serving. So you have over here, when Moshe says, "Milu yedchem hayom Hashem," my point is that here the Torah is already intimating in the story that through this killing of their brethren, they will assume a certain position within the nation, and that position, strangely enough, that God will bestow a blessing upon you. That even though it's an act of killing, at the end of the day, the role the Levi will play is a position which actually is beneficial for the entire people. I'm very much reminded of the story of Pinchas, who kills Zimri, etc. But God says afterwards, I give you Briti Shalom. That that God says Pinchas atoned for Israel. Yes, people died, but in this killing, he actually saved many lives. And therefore, I now, in a sense, install Pinchas as he is the priest for all time. And we have a similar thing over here with the Levium, and that is, Moshe says, yes, it involves killing, and even killing your own relatives, friends, etc. But in this act of killing, you are achieving or being handed a position of blessing. That moving forward, this will be very significant, not just for yourselves, but in terms of the Jewish people. The Levium play a very central role. This is an expression we'll come across in our study. Let's keep that expression in mind. Fine. And now, though, Moshe wants to go back to God and see if, because all Moshe achieved earlier, by the way, this is a very important point. What Moshe achieved earlier in his prayer on the mountain is that God said, I'm not going to kill them all. All God had said was, I'm not killing them all. But God did not say anything more than that. And Moshe now, having eliminated the perpetrators, wants to go back and see if he can accomplish something else, namely to achieve full atonement. I'm going to go back, says Moshe. You sinned very grievously. Now I'm going to go back to God as your representative. Perhaps I may win forgiveness for your sin. That's what Moshe tells the people. And Moshe does this. Vayashav Moshe Hashem vayomar. Moshe returns back to God. Oh no. Here we have an actual confession. It's very interesting. We have a confession over here. Moshe speaks for the people, confesses for the people. Oh no. Chata amazeh chata agdolah. Vayasu lahem Elohei Zahav. Moses goes back, and it's interesting how the confession begins. It's very striking, actually. It begins with the word honor. Honor. Let's see how they translate honor. JPS's translation, but we must take with, I was going to say a grain of salt. I would say several tons of salt often. But in any event, here they translate alas. Does honor mean alas? I don't know. It's possible. The word honor contains the word not, right? Right? Please. There's a plaintive cry to God. Please, honor. Please. It's a sense of sadness. Honor. Alas, maybe there's alas. Who knows? I can't get the right word. So honor. The people have sinned a grievous sin. And then Moshe specifies what the sin is. They made a golden god. Now this statement of Moshe, this confession, is very interesting because the Talmud sees this as a model for our confessions, right? Right? What is the confession that we have? We have, right? We also say Honor Hashem, right? Honor Hashem. Let's say the confession of the high priest on Yom Kippur, the great confessions of the high priest on Yom Kippur, right? Let's see the language of the confessions. Honor Hashem. Chatasi avisi pashaiti lefanecha. Honor Hashem. Kaperna. Twice, right? Honor Vashem. Kaperna, etc. When the high priest confesses on Yom Kippur for the people, twice in that brief confession, he begins with the word honor. Honor Hashem. Chatasi. Honor Vashem. That's number one. Number two, the Talmud has another principle about confession. The Talmud said that the person who confesses has to specify what the sin is, and the source is this verse. Moshe said the people have truly sinned a grievous sin, and then Moshe adds, they made a golden god, right? So you have not just a general statement, chatati, but you have specifically, in some sense, we specify in the al-chaitz of which are written for the community, of course. So the al-chaitz is not my own personal; it's not that personal, but the al-chaitz, right, and the ashabnus try in some sense to specify the al-chaitz in particular. Al-chaitz shechatati, whatever it is, right? The different al-chaitz in the al-chaitz. That's the specification. So this statement over here is Moshe's confession for the people as a representative of the people is seen as the model for confession. It's actually still very interesting that our confessions, before you say that I sinned, even you have the word honor. Please, maybe honor does mean the last, but there's a sense of before I confess, I sort of approach by saying, I'm very sorry. It's what it comes down to. I mean, it's a deep sorrow. I have deep sorrow. And I'm asking you from the depths of my heart, before I even say I sinned. But you enter it, there's a certain frame of mind that you have before you enter into the confession. I would say that the practice of the Jewish people, that before Yom Kippur night, before Kol Nidre, that we confess, even though we confessed already at Mincha time and Yom Kippur is full of confessions. But there's something about the confession. You enter into Yom Kippur, I would say, it's not yet Yom Kippur, but there are different customs about different confessions that were written for the entrance into Yom Kippur. It's a way of saying that this is a day of atonement. It's a day of confession, and that emotionally and psychologically, I want to put into my head this idea of confession and what's necessary for confession. And that's the honor Hashem. So Moshe says, honor chata. That's the first thing Moshe says. And Moshe continues with a very curious statement. V'ata. So now, im tisa chatata means if you forgive them, that's good. V'im ayin. But if you refuse to do so, mecheni na misifrecha asher katafta. You can blot me out of the book that you have written. Erase me from the book which you have written. I just want to stop for a moment. We should reflect upon this verse, which is quite remarkable, I would say. Remarkable in more than one way. First of all, this is the person who's saying this, that if you forgive them, we can move forward. If not, blot me out from the book. This is the person who originally, when God spoke to Moshe back in chapters 3 and chapter 4, the burning bush, and God instructs Moshe in every which way to go back to Egypt and to be central in taking us out of Mitzrayim. And Moshe has one excuse after the next. He doesn't want to do it. I can't speak. They won't believe me. Power won't believe me. At the end of the day, when God answers all his questions, get somebody else, He's not a person who's very anxious to get involved with these people. We even understand that they're responsible in one form or another for his being in exile. But over time, things change, right? When he first fails in Egypt, turns back to God. Why have you harmed these people? Why did you send me? You made things worse. But over here, he's saying more than that. He's saying, listen, you want to destroy them, you destroy me. Because I'm with them. Is it a negotiating ploy, or is it something that actually, that's how he feels? He feels we're all part of one, we're one people. And in particular, the word mechenida is a very striking word, right? Because the word mechenida, right, is a word that was used, first of all, when God destroys the world, and before Noah, right? Vayimach et kol hayikum. We had mentioned earlier the connection of Moshe to Noah. What Moshe is saying is, in effect, you offered Noah you saved Noah from the world you were raised. But I as the second Noah, but I'm the second Noah who says I'm not interested in saving only myself. And therefore, if you're going to erase them, you can erase me as well. And I think we also should remember that the word limcho, to erase, is the word that the Torah uses later in terms of Amalek, actually. So God's enemy. What Moshe is saying over here is, listen, you forgive them or else. You like me, then I'm with them. Forgive them or else. But God's response is very striking. God's response to Moshe is, says God, I don't work that way. I'm not going to work that way. I'm not going to erase you because of their sin. Everybody's responsible for themselves. So they're responsible. Your righteousness is not going to save them, and their insolence is not going to condemn you. That's a very powerful statement over here. You have over here something very interesting. I mentioned Amalek, right? And you have with Amalek exactly this thinking. In other words, if you think about Amalek, actually, it's earlier we had in chapter 17, right? Chapter 17, that's where it appears. Earlier we had it. In chapter 17, God says, tell you, Ketov zot zikaron b'sefer v'simbios ne Yoshua, ki mocho emchen zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. There you have it. Write this down in the sefer, right? That's what God said in chapter 17. Write this in a book, in a sefer, that I will erase Amalek from under the heavens. There you have the conjunction of the sefer together with the erasing. By the way, there is a practice of scribes who are writing a Sefer Torah that they write and then they write maybe even that verse and then they erase it. It's very interesting. Then, because that verse is where we have this idea of writing a Sefer. First time we ever come across the mitzvah to write a Sefer is when it comes to Amalek. Ketov zot zikaron b'sefer v'simbios ne Yoshua. So God's response is, those that are guilty, I hold accountable, and those that are not guilty are not accountable. You're not guilty for their sin, so I reject what you're saying. But does God reject the possibility of forgiveness? So let's see what God continues to say over here. God says to Moshe, in verse number 34, go back, Moshe. You will guide or lead the people to where I told you. My angel will go before you. That is, you're going to go into the land, and I'm going to send my angel. But on the day of my accounting, I will hold them to account for their sins. And the Torah says, "Vayigof Hashem et ha'am al asher asu et ha'egel asher asa Aaron." God held them accountable for the egel, the golden calf, which Aaron had made. Here, I wanted to emphasize that two things. First of all, God says to Moshe, "You're going to go into the land, but." And we'll get to this point, very important point, my angel will walk before you. Now, it's not clear what angel we're talking about. We'll have to get to this angel later on, this messenger or angel that will walk before you. But, here they translate on the day of my reckoning, right? Or my accounting. I will hold them accountable for their sin. So it's not clear at what point God holds them accountable for their sin. The next verse says God, in fact, did send a plague upon the people for what they did. They made the golden calf, which Aaron had made. God holds them accountable. But it's not clear at what point there is this plague. But here we come to a very important word, which is the word pakad. We remember that when Moshe complained to God in the burning bush that the people will not believe me. And God said, they will believe you. And Moshe goes back to the people at the end of chapter 4, and it says, Vayameina and the people believed, Ki pakad Hashem et amo, that God had redeemed the people. So the word pakad means to redeem. But the word pakad, as they translate here, I think is correct, is to hold accountable. The word pakad has another meaning, which is to count. Chomesh HaPikudim, the book of Bamidbar is called the Chumash of Pikudim, of taking a census. There are two census in the book of Bamidbar, in the beginning of the book and in chapter 26, the first generation and the second generation. So the word pakad actually is a very interesting word. It means redemption, but it also means taking account. And
Is
here,
Hashem, Rabbi Silber, is Hashem asking Moshe to also be accountable for how he speaks to him, what he's saying? Because that word is reserved, as you say, Amalek, really heavy duty. Don't make yourself the central part of this.
right, now the word Pokad doesn't come with Amalek, but the word Macha comes with Amalek.
Right.
Is there I think God is correcting Moshe, that for sure. God's not angry with Moshe. Moshe is amazing. Moshe is willing to sacrifice himself and self-sacrifice, but God's saying that I don't work that way. But the point I'm making over here is a different point, which is this. At the end of Sefer Bereshit, Joseph speaks to his brothers, the very last verses of Bereshit. Joseph says to his brothers, listen, someday God's going to redeem us. Someday God will be poked us. And when that happens, take my bones together with you. Right? Pokod yifkod Elohim etchem. Joseph repeats that at the very end of Bereshit, the next two of the last three verses of Bereshit. And the point about Pokod Yifkod, and I made this point in the past, it's emerged from a conversation I had many years ago with a very good friend of mine in Israel, Shimon Deutsch. And we discussed the idea of the word Pokad can mean to remember. But there are two words for remember. There's the word Pokad and the word Zachar. To read Zachar typically is positive. Lizkor is just 99% of the time very positive. But the word Pokad has a positive side to it, but it also has a negative side to it. And negative in the sense that it means to hold accountable. Poked avod al-banim. The Torah says God is poked. God visits the sins of the parents upon the children. That's poked. So over here, uviyom pokti or fokaliti alhem, says God, I'm not going to destroy the people. I'm going to give them the land. But there is a price to be paid for the golden calf. Yes, you did kill the perpetrators, but it wasn't just the perpetrators. Everybody participated in the golden calf. God said, I would destroy all of them. God will not destroy all of them, but it requires further punishment. Is still required. The golden calf has further repercussions. And that's what Moshe had gone up to God to get full atonement for the people. And what God is saying is, yes, there is atonement. There's also still a price to be paid at some point in time. The Chumash doesn't say it happens right away. The Chumash does say it happened. It's very striking for the golden calf the people had made, the one that Aaron made. As we spoke about in the past, Aaron is never actually, there's no sense in Sefer Shemot that Aaron is in jeopardy of being killed. The Chumash never suggests that. The Chumash does suggest that in Sefer Devarim, that Aaron was also to be killed, and that Moshe saves him. But over here, there is no sense of that. Aaron represents the people. He's like the flag. If the people are going to live, Aaron's going to live. But on the other hand, he made the golden calf. But it's still the people forced him, or the people coerced him, or the people pressured him. So that's the story. So, but God, the good news is you're going to possess the land. The not so good news is the words, my angel will go before you. We have to figure out who is this angel. That takes us to chapter 33, which we will begin. So we're not going to finish the golden calf story. We'll have to spend more time when we resume after the break. But we will finish that, and then we'll go back to the laws of Mishpatim. We'll see how long that takes. There's so much here. Okay, let's continue. Now we get to the next chapter. Fine. Let's start chapter 33. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. Now, God speaks to Moshe. Lech alei mizeh, atov ya'om asher ha'leita be'eretz Mitzrayim, el ha'aretz asher nishbati, li'Abraham, li'Yitzchak, li'Yaakov, le'mar, l'zarecha atneno, v'shalachti lefanecha malach, v'geirashti et achnani, amori, chiti, prizi, hachivi, v'ha'ivusi. Next verse. El Eretz Zavat, scroll down. El Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. I'll bring them to a land of milk and honey. Scroll down. Next verse. Kilo, right. Kiyam Kshe Orefat. Kilo Elebekir B'cha. I can't go in your midst. Kiyam Kshe Orefata. Penachelcha Badorach, lest I consume you along the way, destroy you on the way. Right. So what is God saying to Moshe? I said I would send my angel. Okay. I'm going to send my angel. and my angel will actually defeat the nations of the land, the Canaanite, the Hittite, etc., etc., and you will possess the land of milk and honey. All good, but I'm not going with you. I cannot go bikirbacha in your midst, lest I destroy you on the path. So here we come to a major question, and it has two parts to it. So one part I'm going to leave out for now. That will take us to a whole discussion. But let's just stick to what it says over here. What is God saying over here? Listen, I made a promise to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to give their descendants the land, which Moshe reminded God of back in chapter 32, and I plan to keep my promises. They will possess the land. They will drive out the Canaanites. They will possess the land of milk and honey. And I'm going to send my angel to help you. However, the big however, the but is, I'm not going with you. I'll tell you why. Lest I consume you along the way. In other words, we can't be together. Because if we're together, then you're going to misbehave. Because you always misbehave. You're Sheoref. You're a stubborn people. It's set in your ways. You're not going to change. So we're going to fight. And when we're going to fight, it will be a very bad outcome for you. I will destroy you along the way. Therefore, you're better off with the angel. That's the plan. And you get what you want. You get the land of milk and honey, and you drive out the Canaanites and all the others. That's the news. Now the question is that good news or bad news? I think most people would think it's not so bad, actually. It's pretty good. Made a golden calf and all that. And look, God is going to, okay, we had to pay a price, but now we're moving forward. And we have an angel, too. It's going to help us capture the land, right? Next verse is Vayishma'am et hadavar hara hazeh vayitabaru. Lo shatu ish et yo'alav. The people heard this bad news. Vayitabaru, they went into mourning. Lo shatu ish et yo'alav, and nobody put on their finery or their jewelry. So the people are actually in mourning, which is very striking because you wouldn't think so. You have God's angel, but you don't have God. And the key word is lo eleh b'kir b'cha. So first of all, let's understand what that means. I'm not going to go b'kir b'cha. So in the context over here, it means one very simple thing, which makes total sense. Lo eleh b'kir b'cha means there'll be no Mishkan. The idea of the Mishkan was, the Torah is explicit. V'yasuli mikdash b'shochati b'tocham. Build me a temple, and I will dwell b'tocham. Doesn't say in the temple. I will dwell amongst the people. Through the medium of the temple, the mikdash, I will dwell amongst the people. Says God, there won't be a mikdash. And of course, as we have pointed out, there can't be a mikdash because they don't have the tablets. So you can't build it anyway. There's no mikdash. Okay, I can't go, and God explains why. Sounds very reasonable, actually. But you do have my angel. But the people are unhappy with this. The people are mourning the fact that there won't be a temple. And when you think about this verse, what comes to mind immediately, obviously, is this. We have a day on the calendar where we mourn the fact that we have no temple. The day is called Tisha B'Av. Now, Tisha B'Av is a rabbinic invention. It's not in the Torah. Tisha B'Av is a rabbinic. It's found in the prophetic writings with different Kabbalah, but it's not in the Torah. So it has the status of a D'Rabbanan. Having said all that, that is certainly the case, but the idea of Tisha B'Av is right here. Because the people have everything else. They haven't even have God's angel. They're going to possess the land. But they won't have a temple. Can't have a temple. And when the people's response is very striking, they mourn. It's a response of mourning. And the mourning it takes the form of the way they dress. They don't put on ish edyo. Edyo is often interpreted as, they translate finery, but it could also be jewelry. Remember, the golden calf was made with the jewelry. Parkun is mei hazahav, with the zamim. In the ears of your children, your wives, etc., So over here, the people are saying, we're not satisfied with this. We want God to go amongst us. And this is really I would say, the core, the golden calf story. This is at the heart of the golden calf story. I want to emphasize that the way the story is told in the book of Exodus, Sefer Devarim is different. But in the book of Exodus, the people's survival is assured before Moshe comes down the mountain. We know that God will not destroy the people. God said that. Torah says it. So the only issue is the nature of the relationship. So the relationship here is, okay, there's an angel on one hand, there's no God, there's no God's presence on the other, there's no Mishkan. So the response is very striking. The people are upset. People are mourning. And now the question is what's going to happen next. This is the main point of the story, and it starts in the next verse. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emoro b'nei Yisrael atem am kshei oref. Rega echad eleh b'kirbecha b'chiliticha. God said, tell the people, you are very stubborn. If I go amongst you, b'kirbecha, that's the key word. I will destroy you. I'll consume you. So now take off your jewelry at Yecha, and I will consider what to do. Now the JPS translation actually tries to finesse a problem over here. And their finesse, I happen to agree with 100%. If you look at the translation of the JPS, it says, tell the people you're stubborn, you're stiff-necked. If I go amongst you for a moment, I'll destroy you. Now then, leave off your finery, and I will consider what to do to you. I believe this is the correct interpretation. But the problem JPS is addressing is this. God says, take off your finery. In verse number 5. But in verse number 4, it said people didn't put on their finery, right? In verse number 4 was Shatu Isha et Yoalav. None put on their finery. So why does God say in verse number 5, take down your finery? They don't have no finery. They took it off already in verse number 4. That's the problem. The JPS's solution to the problem, I mentioned many times, the JPS's translations are very often inaccurate. They're very nice translations. There's truth and there's beauty. The two don't always go together. You know what I mean? So the point is that JPS translates not take down. Jewelry's already down, but rather leave off. And I think that's true. In other words, I think Horeda over here doesn't mean take them down. They're already wearing them. But Horeda has a different feeling. Take them down means in more of an active sense, because the previous verse says they didn't put them on. When God is saying, "Oh yeah, forget not putting them on, take them down," was leave them off. I didn't put on my jewelry this morning, but you know what I mean. But God says, don't put on the jewelry. Just take it down, and let me consider what to do. Now, this is a very striking verse. You see from this verse, God is presented in very human terms. What is God saying over here? What God is saying is, I'd like to see if this could work, but for the life of me, I can't figure out how. That's what's presented over here. Take off the jewelry and let me think about what to do. Let's figure out a way. Maybe there's a way to solve the problem. I don't see any way, because if I go amongst you, obviously there's going to be a fight, and obviously if we fight, you're going to lose. I'll destroy you. On the other hand, people are mourning. Says God, okay, keep the jewelry off, and let's consider let me figure it out. Now the next verse is very striking. Vayitnatzlu v'nei Yisrael et yom har chorei. Vayitnatzlu. Here they translate the Israelites. Here they translate remain stripped of their finery from Mount Horeb. That I'm not crazy about. But the point is that the JPS is bothered by the same problem, right? The jewelry's already off. The jewelry's already off. Okay, God said, keep it off. So what does it mean they remain stripped? They are remain stripped of the jewelry. They don't put it back on. But the point of I'm not here to defend the JPS, but I think the point of it is right. In other words, there's a difference between Horeid and Vayit Natzlu. And the point of Vayit Natzlu is this. In other words, there's one thing I'm not putting on my jewelry this morning. There's another. I'm not going to put it on. And there's a third thing, which is I'm distancing myself from the jewelry. Strip themselves of the jewelry. It's out of sight, out of mind. And the point of the Chumash is, what the translation can't pick up. The point of the Chumash, this is a very important point. The jewelry that they made the golden calf, the Medrash picks it up. The Medrash has Moshe saying to God, not only what did you expect of these people, they were slaves 3 months ago. Moshe says more than that. And only Moshe can say this. Moshe says to God, stop pointing the finger at the Jewish people. You want to point a finger? How about pointing at yourself? Where did they get this gold from in the first place? You instructed us to take the gold from Egypt, right? If you don't instruct us to take the gold from Egypt, there's no golden calf. So what are you blaming them for? You're blaming the wrong party over here. Have you looked in the mirror lately? That's what the Medrash says. Oh, the Medrash talks that way, And the Torah says the Jews did what God said. God said, take the gold and the silver from Egypt. Remember the language of the Chumash? V'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim. V'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim. You will empty out Egypt. Nitzaltem. And here you have Vayit Natzlu et Yom Har Chorev. What the Chumash is saying is something very deep, which is the golden calf, and we talked about this, was a demonstration that from a spiritual standpoint, we're still in Egypt. And what you have to do is distance yourself from Egypt, from the culture of Egypt, from the gods of Egypt. V'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim, but over here, that's why you got the gold. But now, Vayit Natzlu et Yom Har Chorev. You have to distance yourself from that very gold. You have to leave Mitzrayim. Second half of the book's about spiritual Egypt. Talked last week about the gods of Egypt. The implication in the Chumash that the Jews worship the gods of Egypt. They talked about that, about the god Ra, and all of that. So you have 3 different stages over here. The Ibn Ezra was bothered by this, of course. The Ibn Ezra translated verse number 5, Horeid et Yechame Alecha, that actually it means the Jews had already, for God had said beforehand. The Ibn Ezra had verse number 5, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Amor b'nei Yisrael atam Hashem Horeid et Yecha, for God had said earlier. In other words, verse number 4, which says they didn't put the jewelry on, chronologically follows verse number 5. For God had said, not God said, right? That some translations had, I think the Koran has God had said, but the JPS translation says God says. Personally, I like the JPS in this case better. Normally, that's not the case. But I think that is the pshat over here. But here you see the same point. God wants it to work. The people want it to work somehow. But no one can figure out how to do it. How do you make it work? Into the picture, and this is the greatness of it, into the picture comes the one who's going to make it work. The intermediary. The intermediary is going to bring the 2 sides together. 2 sides are stuck. And someone's going to step into the breach and going to make it happen. And that person is the great hero of the golden calf and the hero of Yom Kippur, actually. That's Moshe. Moshe is going to figure out a way to bring the sides together. That's our topic to be studied in the future. But let me just start with one verse, and I'll stop and take questions. We'll have to continue this when we resume after Pesach. It says, Moshe yikach et ha'oel. What does Moshe do? There is no Ohel Moed. There is no temple. So what does Moshe do? He takes his own tent. He puts his own tent outside the camp, not inside, not Bekir Beinu, but out far away. Far from the camp. He called his own tent Ohel Moed. Ohel Moed, we're reading Vayikra this week. Ohel Moed is the Mishkan. Moshe calls his house the Mishkan. We have a new Mishkan. It's not inside the community, it's far away. But if Hashem, whoever would seek God, What is Moshe doing? God said, I can't go in their midst. Says Moshe, you can't go in their midst. You want to go, you can't go in their midst. Okay, you know what? Let's have a different setup. You won't go in their midst. You go in my midst. Far away. It's not inside the camp. It's a far away. But for those who want to go out and take the journey, it's accessible. So Moshe makes God accessible, but God is not Bekirbo. That's the first step. And he does this by creating, in a way, a Mishkan. But the Mishkan is not the Mishkan that we speak about in the Parsha of Truma and Tetzaveh and Vayakov and Pekudei. The Mishkan is Moshe's own personal tent, but he calls it Ohel Moed. So this is the beginning of the process of reconciliation, which is really the key to the story, key to the book. And we'll have to pick up with that next time we meet. Let me stop here and take comments or questions on what we looked at today. As I said many times, the Golden Calf, I think, is the most important story of the book of Exodus. It's really the story in which somehow it's a way for God and the people to be together.
So, Rabbi Silber, so this mention of Ohel Moed, would that not have been the original intent of the gold? But they couldn't wait so long. They didn't have that sort of, ability to do long term. The initial gold was for later. Mishkan, Ohel Moed, no?
The golden calf is certainly related to the Mishkan. There's no question about it. It's a physical, tangible thing you can touch. It's according to Rashi, there wouldn't even be a Mishkan if it weren't for the golden calf. It's related to the golden calf, but it's not a Mishkan that the God. The point of the Mishkan is, but the big emphasis in the Chumash is that God gives us all the instructions about them. You don't just build God's house. God determines exactly how it's going to be built. You follow God's plan, and there are all kinds of rules and regulations around it. Don't get too close, etc., etc. Have to be in a certain state of mind. The golden calf is exactly the opposite. It's that the people did it themselves. There's no rules and regulations, and they're getting very close. They're dancing right around it. The whole idea of the Mishkan is you could approach God. There's always a distance. The holiest place, no one even goes. The Holy of Holies, the Kohen Gadol, once a year. No one else can ever go there. So it's similar in the sense it's a tangible thing, but it's exactly, in terms of their thinking, it's 100% opposite of the Mishkan.
And on one hand, they're doing the Kelim, they're making the Kelim, and then Bezalel says to Hashem, we need a house for it. And Moshe, says, yes, we have to build the Mishkan. But anyway, the strip part, it seems like it was forced on them. It wasn't just JPS. Every Chumash says it in English. I don't know. It says they were stripped.
No, but they do it themselves. My Yidnasu is reflexive. No one forces them.
Yeah.
It's a reflexive. They decide themselves to distance themselves from it. Part of their repentance. They're just removing the first step of repentance. We'll talk about it as we get back. The first step is their own recognition that they have to distance themselves from the goal. That's the first step of tshuva. Well, we'll get to it later on. All right, anybody else comment there? Yes.
Sure. It's the whole process is similar to what God offers first is a transactional relationship. I will give you everything that I promised, but I won't love you. And you guys won't love me. It's what we will do, what we promise to each other. And then when they begin to mourn, they reveal that their relationship to God is an emotional one. It's not a transactional one. And therefore, God is willing to relent also with Moses' intercession.
Right. I mean, the relationship I think would change over time. And we'll have to see how this plays out. This is where the story, this is the heart and soul of the story over here. This is where it starts. And the first step, of course, is this Moshe putting his tent. We'll talk some more, and when we come back, we'll discuss the story. I wanted to wish everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Looking forward to meeting once again after Pesach, continuing our journey through the book of Exodus, and yeah, I think it's again a story which has a lot of resonances for us. And this was Moshe really. This is Moshe's greatest moment here. Somewhere he enables God and the people to come together. Moshe is a broker in the story. It's not about Moshe. It's about Israel and God. But And we'll see when we pick up the story. Anyway, Chag Kosher V'Sameach to everybody.
Amen. Toda rabah. Just
Looking forward.
amen.
Chag Kosher V'Sameach, and I would like everyone to know that you can sign up for the continuation of this course starting after Pesach on drisha.org/classes. Take care, everyone. Be well, and I hope to see as many of you as possible over Sfira Zman. Good
Thank
day.
you.